Okay, so this lecture burst is going to cover mostly humanistic perspective as well as social cognitive learning theories on personality. But I just wanted to finish up on how the psychoanalytic perspective views assessing the unconscious. So, how do we go ahead and measure this reservoir of the mind? And one of the most commonly used methods is through projective testing. And projective testing can be a number of things. Most famously are the Rorschach ink blot tests. They're the most widely used, and they're a set of 10 ink blocks designed by Herman Rorschach, and it seeks to identify people's inner feelings by analyzing their interpretations of the blot. So people would look at the blot and say what they thought it meant, what they thought it was showing, and that based on their description or the story that they give of the blot would be indicative of kind of what was seeping in the unconscious mind. There's also the thematic apperception test, the TAT, developed by Henry Murray, and that is asking people to express their inner feelings and interests through stories that they make up about an ambiguous scene. So a person's given a photo and they're asked, what's going on in this photo, or tell a story of what you think is happening. And oftentimes we see themes pop up in people's stories across pictures and across photos. And it's those themes that can indicate maybe where the mind is. The only problem with this, the thing that critics argue, is that these kinds of tests, these projective tests, lack both reliability, which is the consistency of results over time and over different therapists. You could have one therapist interpret a person's story one way and another therapist interpret the story another way. So it's not super constant there. And then it lacks validity. Is it really predicting what it's supposed to? So even when evaluating the same patient, trained readers come up with different interpretations, right? So there's the reliability issue. And then projective tests can actually misdiagnose a normal individual as pathological, which is an issue with validity. If we sense pathological themes presented in a person's understanding of a picture, yet they have no mental illness, that's problematic. And then it's kind of like looking for something that isn't there. All right, now we're going to get on to humanistic perspective, where we look at Maslow and Rogers. And this perspective really bridged the Freudian thinking with the contemporary cognitive views of personality. So focusing more on people's capacity to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, and nurturing that capacity, as well as nurturing courage and hope and optimism as a good sense of self. So let's look at some of the key concepts here. Humanistic theory is not scientifically researched, but it has been shown to be very effective in therapy situations where the focus is on traits that make people uniquely human. So the will to live, the power to go on. It's a reaction against a lot of the negativity that psychoanalysis and behavioral perspectives brought, because those were very mechanistic and very focused on sort of those negative internal drives, right, of the id. And behaviorism, it's like everything has a consequence and we're always striving to learn. And humanistic perspective was much more centered on what a person's capable of and who they think that they are. So Carl Rogers had developed this sense of self and sense of self-concept, and it involved unconditional positive regard. He saw that as being a very important thing that others provide in a person's life that helps them to form their self-concept, and the congruity of the real and ideal selves a person kind of thinks of leads to a fully functioning person. So a person's always kind of like, here's what I'm really like, and then here's who I really want to be. How do I get there? And it's the getting there that leads them to be a fully functioning person. So conditional positive regard is like, I will love you if, right? Unconditional positive regard is, I'm going to love you no matter what, no strings attached, no conditions. And so Rogers, as well as Maslow, felt that it was really important to provide their clients with this in therapy. So we're going to talk a lot more about this when we get to psychological therapies, but just to touch on it really quickly, if a person hasn't had unconditional positive regard in their life, they may have a very low sense of self, very low self-concept. And so it's really essential that the therapist give that to them so that they can be in an environment where they feel loved and like no matter what they say, they're going to be accepted. And it allows them to get things off their chest that they need to, that maybe they've been holding on to, in a safe environment where they feel like they can do that. And it's in that process that Maslow would say a person becomes self-actualized. So he proposed that we as individuals are motivated by a hierarchy of needs, that it starts down here at what's deficient needs, and it works its way up from the basic physiological needs we have for eating, drinking, safety needs to feel safe, feel protected, feel secure, to feeling like we belong and that we're loved and that we're cared about, to feeling like we're esteemed, respected, revered, that all that leads to a self-actualized person. And it's only when you've reached self-actualization that you can fulfill your potential. The problem is that we fear and doubt our own abilities oftentimes, and the people in our lives can feed into that. Cultural environment might stifle us by imposing norms on us that stifle our growth and stifle our own individual exploration. Our childhood experiences might inhibit personal growth. We might be in a household that's very restraining and confining, living up to other people's standards instead of exploring what our own interests are. That all of those can thwart our self-actualization process. And there's a really good movie called Dead Poets Society. Some of you might know it, with Robin Williams. It's a great example of Robin Williams helped his students become self-actualized. He helped take them from here to here. When a lot of them grew up in homes that were very stifling, high expectations, not a lot of love, and so they were doing things they didn't really want to be doing, felt like they couldn't really express themselves openly in a way that they wanted to, otherwise they wouldn't be accepted. And so what we see happening at the end of the film for some is this process of self-actualization occurs in exploring finally who they are. So Roger's sense of self is really bringing the real self, who you are, who you see yourself as, in line with the ideal self, who you want to be, who you aspire to be, all your goals and your aspirations, that there should be a match there. It should be a harmonious relationship, and that a person who is in the process of self-actualizing is actively exploring potential and abilities, experiencing that match between the real self and the ideal self. That's a fully functioning person. These individuals who are in touch with their own feelings and abilities are then also able to trust their innermost urges and intuitions and kind of go with it. And Rogers would say that a person needs to have unconditional positive regard to be fully functioning. Maslow would add to that and say that self-actualization is what people are always striving to achieve, and to be fully functioning is a necessary step to becoming self-actualized. So this theory has had a lot of lasting impact on counseling, on education, child rearing. Those are the areas we've seen it have the most impact in an applied setting. And again, you know, the emphasis is on a positive self-concept. It's on empathy, having empathy for one another, and the thought that people are basically good and can improve over the course of treatment and therapy. And that was not necessarily the case with Freud. So now we're going to switch to the behavioral and social cognitive perspective. So here Bandura is the big name there. He believed that personality is the result of the interaction that takes place between a person and their social context, their social environment. He believed that the human being is the agency, that we're not just waiting for life to happen to us. We're not necessarily reactionary, rather we're integrative. We take every experience, we take our surroundings, and we integrate that into our understanding. And so we're not merely products of the environment, but we're managers of our own life circumstances, that we choose how we deal with what life hands us and how we process the things that we go through. So for him, self-efficacy is a big component in this perspective. How effective do I feel as an individual at managing and mastering my own future and where I want to be and where I want to go. And this is often going to dictate whether or not people persevere, whether they make it through hard times and actually grow and learn and understand themselves better, or if they kind of become bitter or experience setbacks and don't grow from them. And don't really understand their role in the whole process. So, he was very big on the learning theories end of things. And we talked about this when we talked about the chapter on learning, and just stating that basically behaviorists are defining personality as a set of learned responses or habits. That's how they characterize personality. It's how we've learned to respond and our habits we've formed. That's the more behaviorist end of it. And then the social cognitive end of it emphasizes the importance of others' behaviors and one's own expectations. So although some critics think that human personality and behavior are too complex to explain as the result of cognitions and external stimuli interacting with each other in the environment, there are people that point out that this viewpoint, these learning viewpoints, have enabled the development of many different kinds of therapies that have become really effective in changing undesirable behavior. So when a person has responded to negative life events in a way that's brought about negative undesirable behavior, like they're not growing, they're not changing, they're doing some really negative things. How do we get rid of that? How do we change that? And social cognitive theorists say that it really is a focus on your cognitions and how you're thinking about what has happened to you, and then your willingness to actually change the behaviors that are intertwined with that. So part of Bandura's theory was reciprocal determinism and self-efficacy. And so he said that, behaviors governed not just by the influence of external stimuli, but also response patterns, how we get used to responding to, anticipating things, judging things, and then we remember details of certain things. We model our behavior after others. So 3 factors, he would say, influence our behavior. The environment, which is the physical surroundings, and then the potential for reinforcement, like how are we reinforced via our environment. The person, which is their cognitions and their traits that have been rewarded in the past. And then the behavior itself, which may or may not be reinforced at a particular time or space. And then self-efficacy is that characteristic in which a person perceives a behavior as more or less effective. Like, when I do this, is it effective? Versus when I do this, is it effective or not? And then takes into consideration the opinions of others and how competent they feel they can be at changing a particular behavior. And then lastly is Rotter's social learning, just focuses on locus of control. Do I have control over my own behavior, or is it up to external circumstances? and that's going to play a role in determining how I handle it.